So just kind of give you my background. As you can see, I've jumped around a bit in my 16 years in the tech industry. Started out in the tech consulting world at CGI AMS, moved on to DoubleClick, and then went to, it was Razorfish, now it's Sapient Razorfish, where I really started to learn about consumer-facing websites and wireframes and designs. HarperCollins Publishers was my first taste of product management. That's where I wanted to go, kind of moving in the direction from business analysis to product management. And then AKQA, which is another digital agency, was kind of a mix of both. I started out as the director of business analysis there, starting out the practice from scratch. And then transitioned the group, and myself, to product management. Johnson & Johnson, I was a product owner for their e-commerce platform. So they were, as funny as it sounds, Johnson & Johnson, for all their behemoth size, was very new to the e-commerce space, and they had a website, and they sold products, but it was very minimal. So the product I was on was to create a system, platform consisting of the leading edge order management and processing and credit card payments systems in order to actually make it a quality e-commerce platform product. And then my next and current space is Big Spaceship. It's a digital agency in Brooklyn where I am the director of product. So similar to AKQA, I was the first product person they hired, and I've hired one additional staff, and hopefully at some point we'll be hiring a few more. Big Spaceship has been around since 2000 and has been, for most of its life, been marketing and strategy and content. But then the past few years, they've definitely gone in the direction of site builds and complex projects. And of course, that leads very nicely to the need for product management, the product mindset. So that's where I am now. I've been there about 5 months, and so far so good. So I talked a little about this already, like my path. I'm assuming some of you guys are already product managers, some of you want to be product managers. I started out as a business analyst, so doing SQL queries, doing ERP systems for government agencies through CGI. And then when it came to consumer-facing websites, was obsessed with requirements and functional specifications and quality assurance. And then eventually transitioned to product management, where it's more of overseeing the kind of the product vision. So as opposed to a BA, which is concentrating on the information and gathering and making sure everyone knows what they need to do. In addition to that, a product manager and director, and as you move up, is looking ahead to what the product should be, what it's going to be in 6 months, what it's going to be in 5 years, how will we measure success. So really taking an ownership of what the team is building. And then in terms of where I've been in terms of the kinds of companies, I've literally kind of ping-ponged back and forth between agency and internal. The pros and cons of both. Agency, you work with a lot of creative people and you have a lot of energy and enthusiasm. The downside is you don't have as much control over the product because at the end of the day, it's on the client. Internal, you have full control and you know every little bit about the product and you can manage it. The downside is you get bogged down in bureaucracy and red tape and you have to deal with a lot of different groups, which is part of the presentation. So, I'm sure some of you are experienced this and some of you already know that the product managers talk about vision and goals and strategy, and that's critical. But what I want to talk about today is mastery of the details will make or break a successful launch. So I've crafted the presentation as a series of questions that you need to ask and then answer in order for your product to be successful. Again, this is a fairly short presentation. This is a few of the types of the questions that we'll go through. So people, tech, and experience. So people, who are you going to be interacting with on the products in terms of who will have an impact, whether it's a legal group, whether it's procurement, the team members, the people that will actually be building the product, and of course your end users, whether it's the consumer, whether it's an internal user like who are you actually building the product for? Tech. So the system flows and endpoints, everything that you need to know in order to actually build it, because you can have all the strategy in the world and all the greatest wireframes and all the designs and all the analytics. If it doesn't actually get built right, then you've wasted your time. I'm not sure why it's a little screwed up here. And the experience. So the framework, interaction, and design of the product. So how does it flow from page to page? How does the experience differ between mobile and web and maybe a kiosk at the airport? What does the design look like? Will the design change depending on the size of the screen, whether someone can touch it or click on it, whether they have sight issues? All of those things need to be considered. So the first thing is people. What are your user types, and how do their differences affect what they see on the experience? So just a small smattering of user types could include unknown prospect, known prospect, logged out user, logged in user, internal user. The list goes on. And each one of those user types needs to be considered when designing the experience, because each one of those users has a different need, and the business potentially has a different goal for each of those users. For example, a logged in user, we know very much about them, and we know their past purchase history, so we want to sell them something that they have bought previously or that we think they would be willing to buy, versus an unknown prospect where we know little about them, so we want to present them the best options, maybe show them what other people have bought. These are the highest selling items, etc. If it's an internal user, then again, what is their role? What is their permission levels? These are the things that they need to see. These are the things that they need to get approval for. Again, all these things need to be considered when designing for a specific user. Which is the most and least important user type and why? So for any product and any business, every client and every stakeholder and every C-level will say, oh, we want to sell to everyone. We want to engage everybody. That's not actually true. They have their core group of people that they want to sell the most to because they've had success with. They want to break into this new group of users, so they really want to sell the most to that user, or they really want that demographic to subscribe to their particular email. So it's the sussing out of what is the priority user group, and not forgetting about all the other user types that you're designing for, but you want to spend the most love and attention on those high priority user types. And the third for users is, what are users trying to achieve, and how does that dovetail or conflict with the business goals? So again, from a business point of view, it's relatively straightforward. They put on the website or on their app or in the store kiosk their products, and people, of course, would want to buy those products. But maybe someone is just looking to recommend or trying to find out more information, or to figure out what gift to buy for someone, or to go to the store, figure out what they want, and then buy it on Amazon. So all these things need to be considered when you're thinking about what the user actually needs versus what the business wants to sell them. Hopefully it marries up, because if the users are coming to the site for more information, the site provides that information, then the user leaves or subscribes or engages in another way with the company, then you've done your job. But you have to realize that consumers can have 50 million needs and 50 million wants, depending on the day and the season and the type, and depending on whether they had a good day or a bad day. And the site needs to understand and adapt to what those user needs are. Organization. So this is looking within your company and understanding who is going to help you and who is going to make your life a living hell. So who are your day-to-day contacts, your stakeholders, and your business owners, and are they aligned with the product goals and effort aligned? So it seems to be relatively straightforward. You have your boss and your boss's boss, and they, it's come down the pike that they want to build this awesome website, or they want to update the app to include e-commerce capabilities. That's fairly straightforward, except once you actually start digging in, you realize that the VP of marketing is not really interested in people buying, they're more interested in getting people to sign up for the emails, or to subscribe to their Twitter feed, or to actually go to a physical event. versus sales, which of course wants to sell a specific thing, versus and on and on and on and on. What are the groups that can and will impact how your product functions and when it launches? So this is, again, something, all of these come from personal experience. You're mostly working with sales and marketing and tech. Those are usually the main groups that you're working with in order to understand what a product is, why we need to build it, and how to get it built. The groups that come in that nobody ever thinks of until the last minute include legal, compliance, security, procurement if you need to purchase additional vendors or licenses or software. Those are the groups of people that, through no fault of their own, some of them are pretty decent and some of them are just, some of them are not decent. But all of them have power to delay or stop a product launch. So my advice is right out of the gate, understand who those people are from each of those groups and make friends with them. Understand what they need, understand their timelines, because over and over it's we start building, we start doing the wireframes and designs and everything's great, and then, yeah, we should run this by legal, and it's a couple weeks before and legal has a 6-month backlog of things to review. Oops. So to remedy that, whenever you start any product, understand who the legal contact is, who security and compliance is, understand what they need, the time frame they need, how they need to be presented, how often they need to be involved. These are things that if you do it right, if you do it well, and they become your friends, then they will help you and actually give you the information they need in the time frame that you need to do it. And the last question to ask is, among all these, who has actual power versus who is dependent on someone else? So I mentioned a lot of groups. Some of them, and it depends on the company, sometimes the legal group is God. So no one screws with legal. So if the legal says no on anything, we go back to the drawing board and the project doesn't launch for 6 months. Other groups, legal is stepped on, and legal will get to it, and they'll just sign off. And even if we don't get legal, it's fine. They'll just do it after the launch. Which is it? Is it one? Is it the other? Is it a mix of both? Compliance, again, similar track. Is compliance the ultimate gatekeeper? Are they the people that you need to bring in early and often and bless every single design decision, every single code? Or are they pretty lax? Are they pretty like, oh, okay, this will do, and it's fine, and we can, certify when it's being built? So the team. So who is each person that will be involved in the planning, designing, and building of the product, and what is their role? So depending on the size of the product, you could have multiple UX designers, you could have creative designers, you could have copywriters, you could have content strategists, you could have front-end code, you could have back-end developers, you could have DevOps, you could have QA, you could have strategy, it goes on and on. So what a product manager needs to do is to understand each and every person's role, understand what their usefulness is, what they need to do, whether they work well together, and how they all work and what they need to do in order to get this product done. So do they know what they need to do, when they need to do it, and why they are doing it? So luckily, from my background as a BA, a lot of my job was making sure that UX and design and tech knew exactly what they needed. So from a UX and design perspective, it was requirements, so business requirements, functional requirements, all the edge cases that they needed. And then from a tech perspective, it was specifications and annotations. So documenting to the smallest level of detail, the wireframes and designs, so tech could build that. So you may be doing that as a product manager, you may be overseeing junior product managers or business analysts. So making sure that information flows to the right person at the right time. And then from a product management perspective, you also need to tell them why they're doing it. They're not, people may make fun of, back-end developers and that they're code monkeys and you just slide food under the door and, they'll do it and it's fine. What I found is if you tell people, if you include everybody and tell people why we are doing this. I'm not making you stay late at night because I don't like you. We're staying late at night because we have commitments to media and marketing to deliver this product in 3 weeks, and we are not where we should be, and we all need to pull together and do it, as opposed to just do it, just code, and let me know what it looks like. And again, from a UX and design perspective as well, like if they are designing something or creating this elegant flow, and it may be wonderful and beautiful, but it may take 6 more months to design, or it literally can't be built because of the tech systems that are currently in place, it's up to the product manager to professionally and gently let them know that they need to cut or scale back or break up their design and UX in order to meet a specific deadline, in order to meet a specific goal. And then the last is, what is their status and availability? Do they work well together? So, and it's strange that like you're humming along, the product is great, it's coming along, you're in sprint 5 and you only got 2 sprints to go, and then somebody realizes that the lead creative designer is going on vacation the next 2 weeks. Oops. What do you do? Do you have a backup? Do you feel confident that the junior designers can step up? These are the things we need to know in terms of the status and availability. Are they freelance? Do they need to re-up their contract right before a launch? Again, these are, in the grand scheme of things, these are very minor little details, but taking care of them ahead of time, making sure you have a plan, and not just fixing them, but making sure they don't need to be fixed in the first place. It just makes the product launch, product execution and product launch that much smoother and easier, and frankly can make or break a product. Tech. Systems. So what is the purpose, architecture, and capability of each system that will play a role in the product? Are they current, or they need to be built, bought, enhanced? So again, may seem obvious to everyone here, but a thorough and complete understanding of every single system that your product will be touching is critical for a product manager. You may not need to have to code yourself, but you need to know when a developer comes to you and says, XYZ, this API is not going to work, or this system has a limitation and it doesn't have an interface between system A and platform B. You need to understand what the hell they're talking about and to know what the impact of that is and provide a solution. Are the systems homegrown or COTS? COTS is customizable off the shelf. So there's real differences between homegrown and COTS. Homegrown is, for example, Bloomberg does all of their tech in-house. Like literally everything from the ground up, they build themselves. So they have complete control. They don't have to worry about licensing. They don't have to worry about getting the new version. It's theirs. They can do what they want with it. Versus COTS, which is you can customize to a point, but then you're limited in terms of the features that the system has. You may have to wait for an upgrade in 6 months in order to get that killer flow that you've always wanted for this particular product. And again, if it's COTS, what can be customized? So every vendor will say, oh yeah, you can have complete customization and we can do anything you want. That is not true. I'll say that again. That is not true. Every system has its core that cannot be altered, and while you can customize certain things, there are things that you have to live with. So you have to understand that either before you buy into it, which is preferable, but if you've already bought into it or it was there when you got there, understand the limitations, understand what can be customized, and what, in terms of the customizations, how long that'll take, the skills that'll need to actually customize it, and who is actually going to do that. Can you do that in-house? Do you need to get a consultant to do those customizations? What are each system's responsibilities in terms of the availability, storage, and security of data? Again, this is something that has surprised me earlier in my career and keeps on coming up in terms of like, oh, we didn't think about that. A lot of companies, obviously, especially in this day and age, are concerned about security of their data, especially if they're e-commerce. Like, where does the credit card information get stored? Are we storing it? Most companies say, hell no, we don't want to store it. We want to just have the token and be like shield ourselves from liability in terms of like if there, God forbid, there's a payment security breach. But you need to understand from every system, where is the data flowing, which system is the system of record for which data. And in terms of the security, it's not just e-commerce payments, any profile information. The system that is actually storing that information, what is the level of security, who has access, which systems are accessing that information, and how they are accessing that system. Okay. Workflow. So I've talked about the individual systems. Now we get into the systems talking to each other. So what are the interfaces between each system, and what is the transfer mechanism? So my previous job with Johnson & Johnson, it was designing an e-commerce platform from scratch. So multiple systems needing to talk to each other. So how are they talking to each other? Is it a flat file? Is it API? Is it real time? Is it batch? Which system is communicating? Which system is pushing? Which system is pulling? All these things need to be thought of and addressed so that when the actual integration starts, vendor A knows to go to vendor B with the information and data versus vendor B that needs to know how to store the information. Is the data content flow between the systems real time, batch, or manual? For each data type, what is the system of record? So again, if it's a website, if it's a consumer-facing website, users expect obviously real-time interaction. So that means that all data from each of the systems going back and forth needs to be available instantaneously to the users. Versus batch process or manual, when if you purchase something, being able to see shipping information, it may not necessarily have to be real time. So can it be 15 minutes? Can it be half an hour? Can it be 24 hours? All those things need to take into account. And the third, what is the content approval process? Again, this is something that just keeps coming up in products that I've both been involved with and people that have talked to me about their projects. You can start designing and you can start coding, and then somehow along the way, everyone forgets about content, which in reality is, if not the most important thing, and one of the most important things of a website or an app or an in-store experience. Where is the content living? Who is creating the content? Who is approving the content? How does the content go from system A to system B to the website to the app? How does it fold between? How does it go between different breakpoints? Who is managing the rights? Where is it stored? Is it stored in a DAM? Is it stored in the CMS? Does the DAM talk to the CMS? And on and on and on. But again, content approval, and not just the actual where the content lives, but getting it in the first place. Does the content exist? If not, does that mean that we need to hire a production shop to do video and imagery? And how long does that take? Do we need to hire actors? Does it need, what are all the legal requirements in terms of hiring actors? Again, these are the things that need to be thought about early when you're doing practically any digital product these days. Channel. So I'm hoping everyone here has experienced the difficulty of designing for a website versus designing for an app versus making sure that it's responsive, going from a huge desktop screen to a tablet to a mobile screen. What does it look like when it's in a doctor's office on a screen versus an airport kiosk versus an in-store marketing screen? If the content is going and the experience is going on multiple channels, how does it function? How do the functions and designs change per each channel? So an obvious example is for web. It doesn't need to be a touch experience, but if it's just going on the website, then it doesn't need to be touch. If it's a responsive and it's going from web to tablet to mobile, users need to be able to touch big buttons and to be able to manipulate the information with their fingers. If it's in an in-store kiosk, it needs to be a certain height in order for ADA requirements. Does the touch screen sit directly on the physical device? If not, there might be ghosting experience where you touch and then you actually see the touch interface go like a few inches away. For the specific channels, what are the digital and physical capabilities, structures, and restrictions that need to be considered? So if you're doing an app, iPhone, there's models. There's the iPhone X, there's the iPhone 8, 7, and 6. Where are you drawing the line in terms of backwards capabilities? Android, it's obviously infinitely worse. I don't know if I don't know if you've heard of the matrix of hell. So like for developers, the spreadsheet of all the different Android screens, all of the different makes and models, and how to design for all of those different sizes and screens and interactions is makes me not want to be a developer. And the third one, how will the activity and success of each channel be tracked and reported? So this is one bullet in my slide, but this can go into an entire presentation, a month-long presentation of analytics. So how do you track across all these different channels? For web, it's, everyone knows Google Analytics and Omniture and Adobe, but how do you actually track on an app? How do you track on tablet? How do you distinguish between the app and tablet? How do you, if it's a standalone kiosk in a mall, how do you track that? Like, what is the mechanism for tracking the kiosk in mall A versus mall B versus the website traffic? Again, what you want to understand is not of course you understand the overall picture of how the product is doing, how the app is doing. You also want to understand the individual channels and what their impact is from an activity and usage perspective on that particular product. And finally, experience. Are there existing components, modules, and templates that the product will fit into, or does a new structure need to be created? So this is something I'm dealing with as right now in terms of creating templates and components and structures for the websites, for the responsive website. So what does that mean? Does that mean that the entire site fits into these structures? Does that mean that certain pages fit into these structures? How do they conform and contrast depending on if it's web, if it's tablet, if it's mobile? What does that mean from a content creation perspective? If we need to create a unique module, does that mean that all the content that used to be in that module, now we're changing it? Does that mean that all the content needs to be thrown away? Does that mean that we go back to the original module? How does it work in terms of app versus a module versus a touch full screen overlay? All those things to be considered. From both a management and user personalization perspective, how flexible can and should the structure be? So it's always a battle between you want to be able to provide freedom to the users to be able to see an elegant website and something they haven't seen before. On the other hand, you don't want to give your average internal user the ability to mess up your website. So you want to provide some structure and some boundaries, so when they put in text, they can only put in 28 characters. When they upload an image, it has to be from a certain folder, otherwise it'll break the page. When they go through the approval process, like how is that tracked and how does that affect the image and the text that they're using? From both a management and end user personalization perspective, how flexible should the structure be? So again, it's understanding from a personalization perspective, which is all the rage these days. And one day I'll actually work on a project that successfully does personalization. But it's understanding, how much we know about a user. What does that do to the structure? Does that present a whole different website? Does that present a whole different experience? Is it the same for all users except for these user types that are logged in? Things to be considered. Does the framework apply to the entire product or just certain sections? And then I'm sorry, I got cut off there. So again, from a framework, from a templates and components perspective, are you redesigning the entire app to fit into this structure? Are you designing the structure just for this particular section? Are you designing it just for this particular flow? If you're designing it for a small part, does that mean that you also need to think about what happens when you eventually design it for the entire user base? User interaction. What is the primary purpose that the user experience promotes? And again, maybe obvious, but sometimes you go through an entire product and nobody can answer the single reason why someone would come to the site. Is it purchases? Is it discovery? Is it engagement? Is it communication? Is it 20 other things? Why would someone go to the website? Why would someone touch the kiosk in the store? Why would someone download the app in the first place? Is the user experience architecture and principles already defined, or do they need to be created? how much flexibility is there? So similar to the conversation about framework, use the planning and sprint zero phases as best as you can and as long as you can to understand and detail and build the framework, the structure, the overall flow, the principles of user experience, so that when you get into sprint 1 and sprint 2 and sprint 3, you're not figuring out that we want to make everything one click. We want to understand right off the bat from sprint 1 that this is the structure that we need to build for e-commerce, that it is one-click checkout, so that needs to be present on pages A, B, C, F, G, and Z. So all of that needs to happen way before sprint 1 in order for your sprint 1 and sprint 2 to be executional rather than discovery and drawing on a whiteboard. How does the experience differ between user types and channels? So I've mentioned this before, but from an experience perspective, from a user experience perspective, the designers should be able to think about all those user types that I mentioned earlier: a prospect, a logged out customer, a logged in customer, an internal admin, someone who has purchased a ton of products, someone who has only purchased one product in the past year. What are they going to show, and how does that flow differ between those different user types? It also depends on whether the user is using it on an app versus on a website. It also should take into consideration, for example, accessibility. So if the user has a high contrast on their screen, if the user is blind or is can't really see too well, what does that do from a user experience perspective? Design. So again, similar to the user experience framework, what is the design system of the products? Colors, fonts, button treatments, motion, branding. All of these things, if you are figuring this stuff out in the sprints, you're in trouble. You need to have weeks and months of this even before you start getting into the actual sprint work in order to understand this is what a button looks like. When you hover over a button, this is the hover state. When I click, this is the microsecond interaction that the button, that the user sees before they go to the next page. This is what a modal will look like. This is the blue bar that will accompany all modals. These are the things that should not be built as part of sprints. These are the things that need to be decided as part of a design framework even before sprints start. How does the design system stay updated, and how do the changes flow into the experience? So you may have the design experience, but then within a sprint or because of a new requirement or because of something else, the design system needs to change to include a new color, to include different font, to change fonts, to allow for greater flexibility in terms of the buttons, whatever it is. So you've created your design system. Now, how does that get updated? Is it the design system live as a PDF? Is it online in a service like InVision? Is it just in comps represented, in a series of pages? Whatever way the design system is represented, you need to understand how those get updated and how those updates get reflected in the code. Because the developers may be developing on sprint 1 and sprint 2, and in sprint 3, you decide that you need to change the logo, or you need to, hopefully not change the logo, but you need to change some of the colors on some of the borders. How does that get reflected to developers? How do they know what they need to change? How do they need to know? How do they understand what needs to stay the same? All those processes need to be defined. The design system change depending on user type and or channel. If so, how? So from an overall perspective, the design system should stay the same. That's part of why, that's part of branding, that's part of marketing, to imply to the users that these color schemes, this font, this tone of voice is who company X is. However, there are maybe certain user types where if you are a platinum user, you may see a unique logo. You may see a unique set of colors. For example, American Express has their basic card. They also have the black card. All credit cards have levels and tiers of service. If you log in and you see, if you spend $100,000 a year, you probably don't want to have the same experience as someone who spends $50 a year. You want to have a premium experience versus a basic experience. So the design needs to take that into consideration while also thinking about, from an overall branding perspective, making sure that every single user that comes to the app, that comes to the site, that touches that kiosk in the store or the mall or whatever, understands the overall brand and marketing strategy. So as I said, these are a series of high-level questions. I could have, if I had a couple hours, I could list 50 questions and 50 different types. But in conclusion, while everyone admires the bricks, it is the mortar that keeps the house standing. That's my quote. Feel free to use it. That's it. So this is when you guys fire away and ask me anything you like. Please.
I mean, in summary, I thought that this was a lot about risk mitigation,
Sure.
understanding the product before you launch and everything.
Yep.
But from like a product management and product development standpoint, what level degree of trial and error do you get? You know, do you have an idea of when you launch a beta to get user feedback to build upon risk mitigation?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there is, you can ask all the questions you want. You can get all the answers you want. You will never ask all the questions. You will never get all the answers. My hope is for this presentation is to get you thinking about as much of these things as possible to avoid some of these pitfalls. You should be doing trial and error. You should be doing testing. You should be user testing both before launch and after launch. And of course, those should flow into later releases and potentially new products. But the idea is you summed it up well, is to mitigate as many of these risks as possible so that you can actually launch that beta product.
It's actually a similar question.
Sure.
Where for some of the more flexible elements that you're talking about,
Yep.
the AKQA would be ideal for you to have before you start the sprints.
Yeah.
Do you have any processes or things that you use to figure out what the thing you should go with is before you get the sprint?
Yeah. So in terms of, sorry, are you asking about a specific design direction or functionality or?
In terms of those for the frameworks for user interface, and you're saying how you should have these things figured out before
Sure.
you do the sprints.
Yeah.
How do you know that what you have is the thing you go with?
Oh, I see. That's a good question, actually. I think that if what you should know if it works, if you can try to poke holes in it, if somebody comes in and asks a random question about a flow or a design, and either you or the designer or the coder can answer it, then you've done your job. I think you want to account for it as much as possible and to understand that the information, if you have a system in place, then the hope is that you can adapt that system to whatever comes down the road. So,
But do you have, do you go through, with your user test, for example,
Sure.
for that button that you were talking about?
Right.
But,
Yeah.
Are you doing A/B testing, beforehand? What sort of testing?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, as part of any product, I would absolutely recommend user testing throughout the process. So, what I would say is there are things that the designers and user experience can say, we want to do this and let's do it. There are things that the client or the stakeholder feels they want to test. I think that if there are certain things that are givens, like you want to have it easy, you want to have it as minimal clicks as possible, I think those are givens and you don't need to test. I think that if there are things that you're doing, if you think there are a particular flow or a particular design that might turn off some users, if you look at it from an end user perspective and there's a risk of someone not understanding at all what you want them to do, then I think that is something that you need to test while you're designing and while you're developing and when the product launches. So, yeah.
I guess to add to that just a little
Sure.
bit would be you get an idea and there's rarely a gut check that it's the right thing to move forward with. So you get a lot of consent saying, hey, we should do this, we should do that. gut checking before you actually start the product development phase, and you start saying, well, who's the right user and what? Like, do you ever have a process for actually gut checking the executive or a framework for doing that? Like, the human-centered design process, like before the product comes and the build-out starts.
Got it. It's a good question. I think that from my point of view, it's talking to a variety of users in terms of understanding what their understanding of a particular system or design is. I think what you want to do is to try to get as many types of users as possible to kind of poke and prod your design. I also think that at the end of the day, you can test all you want and users can give you the answers you want, but it may not actually be what you end up designing for. Like, the users may not like it, but there also could be, you could decide that you want to push forward with a period of adjustment, and then the users will accept the new design and the new flow and push forward. An example is Facebook, where they're live testing 24 hours, 7 days a week, and some of their features, the users go up in arms about. When they introduced the news feed, people hated it. They hated it. They let Facebook know that I don't want to see this. I don't want to see all these things flying around from all these people. So that's an extreme example of sometimes users can be wrong. What I would say is to try to take as many users as possible into account, but then at the end of the day, it's your decision, it's the design decision, it's the exec decision, and you go for it. And what I would say is, when you launch, you are constantly testing and asking users like what they feel about the product. I would also say, to avoid a rash reaction and kind of going back to a previous design, is to not just understand they may not like it, understand how much they don't like it, what exactly they don't like about it. It may not require a rollback to the previous design. It may require a slight tweak. It may require you sucking it up and pushing through, and then eventually in the next week or the next couple of weeks, when users get used to it, you could ask them again how they like it, and they're like, it's all right. Took me a couple times, but I got used to it. So, anyone else? Yeah, question?
All right.
All right.